They told you to slow down. Not in those exact words. That would have been too honest. And honesty makes people uncomfortable. They said it the other way. They said, you've earned some rest. They said, you don't have to prove anything anymore. They said, be realistic. And the remarkable thing, the thing I find genuinely hilarious, is that you nodded. You actually nodded. You took the cage they built out of soft language and mild concern, and you walked in, and you thanked them for it. You know what be realistic means when a 40-something hears it? It means we've assigned you a lane, and that lane has a speed limit, and the speed limit goes down from here. It means the culture has looked at your age and made a decision on your behalf, filed the paperwork, and sent you the notification in the form of 1,000 subtle signals you weren't even supposed to notice. The gray hair, the younger colleagues, the job listings that describe candidates in language that sounds exactly like you 15 years ago. The way certain doors stop opening, and you're expected to feel grateful for the ones that didn't close. Here's what they forgot to mention. Every dangerous thing in the history of human civilization was built by someone who refused the lane. Ray Kroc was 52 years old when he turned a burger stand into an empire. Vera Wang had never designed a gown until she was 40. Julia Child didn't write Mastering the Art of French Cooking until she was nearly 50. Sam Walton opened his first Walmart at 44. These are not exceptions. These are the people who didn't get the memo or got it and used it as kindling. The war doesn't end at 40. For some people, 40 is the year they finally understand what they're actually fighting. And you, sitting there deciding whether it's too late. I find that very interesting. Let me describe something that happened to you. Slowly, so quietly, you didn't notice it happening until it was already done. Sometime in your late 30s or early 40s, the ambition changed texture. It didn't disappear. That would have been obvious, and you would have fought it. It just got heavier. The same idea that used to feel like electricity started to feel like obligation. The thing you wanted to build, the company, the project, the body of work, the version of yourself that you always knew was there if you could just clear enough space. That thing started to feel less like a destination and more like evidence of something you hadn't done yet, and then the thoughts arrived. Not loudly. Thoughts that do the most damage never arrive loudly, you think? I've already made too many of the wrong decisions to correct course, you think. The people who were going to achieve great things were already doing it by now, and you'd read enough of their biographies to know their timelines, and your timeline didn't match, you think. Maybe what I thought was ambition was really just youth, and youth has a shelf life. And I've been mistaking the expiration date for a suggestion. You think. At some point, continuing to want this becomes embarrassing. And the fear of being embarrassed, of being the 45-year-old still talking about the thing they're going to do someday, quietly became louder than the thing itself. I want to examine that fear for a moment. Not comfort it, examine it. The embarrassment you're afraid of has a very specific anatomy. It's not about failure. People understand failure. Failure is sympathetic. It confirms that you tried, and trying is acceptable at any age. The embarrassment you're actually afraid of is ambition that outlives its social permission slip. The fear isn't that you'll try and fall short. The fear is that someone will look at you. Mid-40s, still wanting something big, still moving toward it with the specific urgency of someone who knows the clock is real. And they'll smile the wrong kind of smile. The one that means bless your heart. The one that means isn't that sweet that they still believe. You know that smile. It's the one that knows it's being kind by not saying the thing it's thinking. Here's something fascinating. Here's something fascinating. I once knew a man who spent a remarkable amount of his life committed to protecting people who never asked to be protected. Very disciplined about it, very consistent. He had decided at some point that his most important contribution was defensive, showing up in time to prevent catastrophe, never to build anything. He called it purpose. I called it the most elaborate avoidance of his own ambition I had ever witnessed. He was very good at it. The city was very grateful. And he never once asked himself what he might have built if he'd been interested in building instead of guarding. The internal logic of slowing down sounds from the inside like wisdom. It presents itself as hard-won perspective. Here's what it actually is. It's the narrative equivalent of a job offer you accepted because it was available, not because it was right. You were offered a story, the story of graceful imitation, of earned contentment, of ambition properly aged and appropriately subdued. And you accepted it because refusing it felt arrogant, because wanting more at this stage felt like ingratitude. Because at least this story had social approval, and social approval is a drug that most people never admit they're on. The story is not true. Not about you. Not about what's actually available to you right now. You have more usable intelligence than you had at 25. You have pattern recognition that cannot be bought or borrowed or accelerated. You have the specific, expensive claret that comes from having wanted something long enough to know with zero ambiguity whether you actually want it or whether you just wanted to have wanted it. That last distinction between actually wanting something and wanting the identity of someone who wanted it is worth everything. Most young people can't make it. You can. So here is the actual question. Not the one you've been quietly circling. The one about whether it's still possible. The real one. What would you attempt right now if the embarrassment you're afraid of were simply not available as an option? Past your prime. I want to spend a moment with that phrase because it is one of the most efficiently installed pieces of psychological furniture in modern culture. And most people carry it without ever questioning the delivery method. Prime is a biological concept applied incorrectly and quite deliberately to ambition. In athletics, your prime is a metabolic reality. Reaction time, muscle fiber, cardiovascular capacity. These things peak in the mid-20s and degrade thereafter. Fine. True. Relevant if you are in fact an athlete. But the culture took that specific limited biological fact and expanded it to cover everything. Creativity, initiative, risk tolerance, the capacity to build, the right to try. It did this because it was convenient to do so. A workforce that believes its peak contribution years are behind it at 40 is a workforce that won't ask inconvenient questions, won't challenge institutional arrangements, won't cost as much to manage. Past your prime is not a fact about you. It is an administrative preference dressed as biology, and you've been paying its rent for years. The actual evidence runs in the other direction. Researchers who study creative output and entrepreneurial success have found consistently phrases that the average age at which people produce their most commercia, lie and critically successful work is older than the myth suggests. The average age of a successful startup founder is 45. Nobel Prize laureates in scientific fields do their prize-winning work, on average, in their late 40s. The brain's capacity for integrative thinking, for seeing patterns across domains, for making connections that require a large base of accumulated experience, peaks later than most people realize, and continues developing long past the supposed expiration date. You are not past your prime. You are in the prime that requires a different operating system than the one you had at 25, and nobody installed it for you. The belief that ambition has an age limit didn't arise organically from human experience. It was constructed. Every institutional structure benefits from people accepting that their most generative years are finite and that the finish line is not, in fact. Further along, pension systems, seniority hierarchies, retirement culture, the whole apparatus of winding down. These are institutional arrangements. Not natural phenomena. They serve specific economic and organizational purposes. They are not wisdom about the human lifespan. They are a story told by systems that function better when their participants believe the story. The most powerful thing you can notice about that story is how it manages to make acceptance look like maturity. The person who slows down, who adjusts expectations, who takes the lane they've been assigned, they get called wise, reflective, graceful. And the person who refuses, who at 42 or 55 or 60 decides that the original ambition was correct and the cultural permission to pursue it is irrelevant. They get called difficult, deluded, midlife crisis adjacent. The culture has made the cage comfortable and made leaving it look like a tantrum. The origin of your hesitation, it's not wisdom. It is a very well-maintained story about who gets to want things and for how long. There are people in your life who will, when you announce that you're starting something significant, make a specific face. You already know the face. It is the face of someone performing support while experiencing skepticism. It's the face that accompanies phrases like, I just want you to be realistic, and I'm not saying don't try. I'm just saying maybe think it through a little more. And at your age, the risk calculus is different. Examine those people, not with anger. Anger is exhausting and misses the point. With curiosity about what they're actually protecting. Almost always, they are protecting their own arrangement. A person who has genuinely accepted their lane, who has made a real, uncoerced peace with limitation, does not feel threatened by your refusal to accept yours. They're simply interested, perhaps even inspired. The person who feels threatened, who needs to import doubt into your confidence, is someone whose own arrangement depends on the shared agreement that the lane exists and the limits are real. Your refusal to agree is, to them, a structural threat. Because if the lane is a choice rather than a fact, then their own acceptance of it was also a choice. And that implication is more uncomfortable than they're equipped to handle at Tuesday dinner. There was also this. I once knew someone very earnest, very committed to a version of himself that other people had approved, who spent enormous energy ensuring that his ambitions never exceeded what the people around him were comfortable with. He called it humility. It was, in fact, the most elaborate form of social compliance I had ever seen, sustained for an extended period. He was very good at it. I found it, as I find most things, instructive. The people who need you to slow down are not protecting you. They are protecting a story that requires your cooperation to remain intact. Here is what 40 brings to ambition, that 25 cannot replicate, regardless of its energy or talent or hunger. Precision. At 25, cannot for precision. At 25, you pursue many things with the same urgency because you can't yet feel the difference between what you actually want and what you want to be seen. Wanting. The capacity to make that distinction, which burns through years of trial, failure, success, refinement, and accumulated self-knowledge, is not available at 25. You build it. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be inherited. And once you have it, The quality of your decisions improves dramatically because you are no longer spending resources on the wrong objectives while being unsure that they're wrong. Credibility. The things you have survived, the professional and personal history you carry, the relationships and failures and navigated complications, these are not liabilities. They are the resume for the next chapter. Every person you will need to convince, every room you will need to move, every partnership you will need to build, they can see the history. History, when it's real and earned and visible, does more convincing than a pitch deck ever could. Urgency that is clarifying rather than paralyzing. A clock that frightened you? It is also the most powerful motivator available. Young ambition has the luxury of treating time as infinite, which means it also has the luxury of treating urgency as optional. You don't have that luxury. This is not a deficiency. This is the pressure that produces diamonds. You know the clock is real. That knowledge, properly metabolized, is the single most powerful acceleration available to a human who wants to build something. The war you could fight now is better than the war you could have fought at 25? Not despite your age. Because of it, there is a version of caution that is genuinely wise. And I want to be precise about this because conflating it with the other kind is how people talk themselves out of things that would have been worth doing. Genuine caution says, I've identified a specific real risk and I've evaluated it with accuracy. And the cost-benefit analysis produces a specific result. And that result is that this particular move at this particular moment is not the right move. The other kind of caution says, I have a feeling. The feeling is uncomfortable. The feeling might be evidence of risk. Or it might be the echo of 10 years of cultural messaging about what I'm supposed to want and how much of it I'm supposed to want at this stage of life. I've decided to honor the feeling as though it's the first kind of caution without doing the actual analysis that would tell me which kind it is. That second kind is not intelligence. It is fear in a more respectable outfit. The people who start the war at 40, who begin the thing they've been circling for years and refuse to let the cultural story determine the expiration date of their ambition. They are not reckless. They are specific. They've done the actual analysis. They know what's at stake and they've decided the stake is worth the wager. The bravery isn't in ignoring the fear. It's in doing the analysis clearly enough to know which kind of caution is in the room. A monster doesn't attack everything. A monster is precise about what it chooses to destroy. The words you use to describe your position are creating a position. Every time you say, I missed my window, you're constructing a reality in which a window existed, closed, and your opportunity expired with it. The window is a metaphor. Metaphors are chosen. You are not required to use that one. Every time you say, I should have started this 10 years ago, you are using the past as a lever to keep yourself stationary in the present. I should have is the architecture of regret. And regret is the most reliably paralyzing emotional posture available because it anchors you to a timeline that no longer exists, about decisions that cannot be changed, producing a feeling of loss about a hypothetical that never happened. It is, from the standpoint of practical utility, a complete waste of a perfectly functional mind. Replace it. I missed my window becomes, I have information I didn't have when I was 25, and I intend to use it. I should have started this 10 years ago becomes, I am starting this now, which is the only moment that has ever been available. It's too late for this becomes, it's too late for the version of this that required youth. The version that requires judgment is available right now. I am too old to fail at something new becomes, I am too old to pretend the things I've learned to want don't matter. These are not affirmations. Affirmations are wishes dressed up in declarative sentences. These are structural corrections. Replacements for language that was always producing the wrong output. Some of the rooms you were in were not designed for someone building a war. They were designed for someone building a war. They were designed for someone consolidating. Someone in the winding down phase of what the people who built the room imagined your arc to look like. Those rooms will actively resist what you're trying to do. Not maliciously, because the room is a room, and rooms have implicit codes, and the code in these rooms says, appropriate ambitions for this stage are of this scale, and no larger. Audit them. The professional association where everyone is congratulating themselves on what they've maintained. A friend group where ambition is discussed in the past tense, where the conversation assumes that the major moves have been unmade in the present is about managing what resulted. The family context where anything that sounds like a large bet is greeted with the specific silence of people who love you and are expressing that love in the form of worry. The social media you consume, calibrated by algorithm to show you people who confirm the cultural story about your demographic. These environments are not your enemies, but they are calibrated to a frequency you no longer want to receive. The audit is not about burning them down. It is about spending deliberate additional time in rooms, physical, virtual, conceptual, that are calibrated to a different frequency. Where people are building at your age or past it. Where the shared assumption is not, isn't it wonderful how you're still engaged? But of course, you're building something. What are the specific problems? The room you're in determines what feels possible inside it. Change enough of your rooms. The next time someone delivers the slow down message, in whatever packaging it arrives, however gentle the concern, you need 2 sentences. Internal. They are not for the person speaking. They are for the architecture of your own response. The first, this is their story about my age, not a fact about my capacity. The second, I have already done the analysis. I do not require theirs. Not aggressive, not defensive, certain. The certainty is the point. Because the slowdown message is not actually an argument. It doesn't present evidence. It doesn't engage with the specifics of what you're building. It doesn't evaluate the actual risk and reward. It is a social signal, a cultural reflex, a transmission from the story about what people at your stage are supposed to want. It doesn't require a counter-argument. It requires a very specific quality of non-engagement. The kind that comes from someone who has genuinely processed the message A and found it inapplicable. You don't argue with a house alarm when you're not a burglar. You simply know what you are and proceed. The final shift is not about language or environment or response. It is about the specific quality of decision that cannot be revoked by external weather. There is a kind of commitment that is conditional. I will pursue this as long as things look reasonable, as long as the people around me remain supportive, as long as I don't encounter discouragement so significant that I have to recalibrate. That is not commitment. That is a trial period with very easy exit conditions. Most people's relationship with their later life ambitions is structured as a trial period, which is why most of them end. The ownership statement is the moment the trial ends. It is the internal declaration, not the kind you announce on social media, not the kind you mention to your friends so they can hold you accountable, the kind that happens privately, in the room of your own decision-making. That this is no longer conditional. That the war you're starting is not something you're attempting to see how it goes. That you have arrived at the precise place where I'm doing this has no longer any hidden clauses attached. This does not require certainty about outcome. In fact, the ownership statement is more powerful when outcome is genuinely unknown, because it means the commitment is to the pursuit rather than the guarantee. The monsters who built things after 40, Kroc, Wang, Walton, Child, and 1,000 less famous versions in every city in the world, they didn't have certainty. They had the ownership statement. They had the private, irrevocable moment when the conditional clause was removed and the war began. That moment is a choice. It is available to you. Stop trying it. Start doing it. Here is the larger system. The culture that told you to slow down was not built by your enemies. It was not designed by people who wished you specifically ill. It was built by a consensus. Slow, accumulated, largely unconscious, that certain kinds of disruption are appropriate at certain stages, and that the appropriate stage for maximum disruption is not yours. The system works better when people at your age are consolidating rather than initiating, when they are adding stability to existing structures rather than challenging those structures or building competing ones. The system doesn't need you ambitious. It needs you productive in the directions already established. This is not a conspiracy. It is a preference. It is a preference. Encoded in 1,000 norms, delivered through 1,000 soft signals, maintained by a social agreement that most people participate in without realizing they're participating. And like all preferences, encoded as norms, it would prefer to be mistaken for nature. It would prefer you to experience it as the natural shape of a life rather than as a constructed arrangement that serves specific interests. The moment you see the construction, it loses its authority over you. See it? What is true about you right now at exactly this point in your life? You have the most complete, most refined, most expensive version of your intelligence available to you. You have knowledge that cannot be faked or rushed or borrowed. You have the specific, irreplaceable clarity of knowing what actually matters to you, not what you were told should matter, not what mattered when you were performing ambition for other people's approval, but what genuinely, structurally matters when all the noise is removed. You are not at the end of your useful life. You are at the beginning of your most capable chapter. The people who change things after 40, not the famous examples I gave you, but the ones you know personally, the ones in your own life. Who did the thing that seemed improbable and did it anyway? They share one characteristic that has nothing to do with talent or circumstance or luck. They refuse the story, not dramatically, not with a manifesto. They simply, at some specific moment, declined to continue treating the cultural permission slip as a requirement. They started the war without anyone's blessing, and the war produced something the world didn't have before. The war is not noble. Let me be precise about that, because I have no interest in sending you out of here with a pep talk. The war is difficult and uncertain, and the people around you will not always understand it, and the outcome is genuinely unknown, and some days the intelligence you've accumulated will feel like weight rather than resource. The war is hard, but the alternative sitting in the lane they built for you, at the speed they assigned, toward the destination they approved, that alternative is not peace. It is just a quieter kind of defeat. Start the war. That is the only sentence that matters.